For eons, the brown waters of the Gulf of Mexico have rolled against the land. When it is calm, it is a convenient sea path. When it is angry, it can be a fierce pool. It offered food and sport, but little else until halfway through the century, when resourceful men thought they might find under that gulf something new. They went out on crude barges and old boats home from the war to seek the promise and the reward. The oil companies had shown little interest in going offshore. There were unique problems and no known technology for exploring below the waves. And of course, they still had millions of acres on dry land under lease. But in Oklahoma City, 500 miles from the Gulf, a young oil man named Dean McGee decided it was time to explore areas where the real potential production might be. Salt domes. Salt domes underwater. The good ones on land were gone, he reasoned, so he talked his partner, former Governor and Senator Robert S. Kerr, into moving out into the Gulf. Dean McGee convinced Kerr that the trade-off of the extra cost of working in the water would yield a much higher opportunity of finding a lot of oil. Dean McGee was not the first to seek the promise. It had been tried in California, where they drilled in shallow water off the end of wharves, in Louisiana, and in Venezuela. In 1938, at Creole, just barely off the Louisiana coast, a wooden drilling rig on a wooden barge found a field. But the war came, and offshore oil was forgotten. But when the war ended, McGee decided to go offshore. The great mainland fields extended out into the marshland, and it was assumed out into the waters of the Gulf. The oil was there, they were sure. The only question is, could it be recovered? Along the Bayou Teche in historic Evangeline country, something was happening that would change the petroleum world. That it happened at all is not short of a miracle. The end of the war meant surplus boats were available, and Kerr McGee began buying them up and hiring young men home from the Navy to run them.
We took our first rig out there, a Kerr McGee rig, and we took it out on LST, and we set it up on a little platform out there, and then we put everything up on this little platform except the pumps and everything, which was down in the LST.
Did you think these people were a little crazy deciding to go offshore to drill for oil?
No, I didn't, but some of the people thought we was crazy. I said we wouldn't go out there on bet. We really thought we were really doing something. So before they ever dreamed of anything like this.
How much money did you make working derricks back then?
Working derricks, we were making 75 cents an hour.
75 cents an hour?
Floor hands were making 50 cents an hour.
Okay. Did you like working offshore?
Always did. So you wake up in the morning, you look at that sun coming over the water, and no beautiful sight than that. Those of you who have missed it, you have never seen anything like it.
When you first heard what they were doing, what they were planning on doing, what did you think?
I said, we ain't gonna be able to drill with this stuff we got. I don't know why. I thought we was gonna do exploration work, go out there and seismograph or something. And yeah, first thing you know, here come, we towed Brown and Root out there with a old wooden hull boat with V12 packers in it to drive the pilots for Block 32, I said, what are we gonna do? But we did it, see, didn't give up.
The company built 2 platforms anchored by surplus World War II ships that were used as crew quarters. They drilled in 18 feet of water, 10.5 miles off the coast. After 2.5 weeks, a roustabout called the boss and told him oil was collecting in the drilling mud. The boss casually said, well, skim it off. And the worker yelled back, skim it off, hell, there's barrels of it. It was a beautiful Sunday morning, October 4th, 1947. Commercial oil had been found in the Gulf of Mexico.
The next 3 days we had a barge filling it up with oil, and he never stopped flowing until now. It's still flowing.
Still going.
Yeah, ain't that something?
It was indeed something, but Morgan City was still not impressed.
My first check, I couldn't hardly cash it. They turned me down at the bank. It was good, but I went to Old Man Lynch right here with my check. I was the first man hired from Morgan City, Kerr McGee, you see. So, boy, I get my check, I run to the bank. Old Man Lynch said, who are them people? We ain't never heard of them. You can't cash that check. So I got to go up to the shipyard where we had up there. I was foreman and called Oklahoma City to verify the check, my little old $50 check.
When it became apparent that Kerr McGee checks were good, the company had no trouble hiring new people. Like a tall Louisiana youngster just back from the Navy, A.J. Doc Laborde.
I didn't realize how badly they needed help on what I'd call the naval or marine side of their business. Their whole philosophy was to go out and take a little bit of the land, these were all Oklahoma guys, and try to set it up in the ocean and drill a well that way. And they were not aware of what we naval types call the perils of the sea. They were very glad to dump a lot of those problems over to me that they had been struggling with. And so that gave me the opportunity to learn a little more about the business. It was very obvious that the way we were doing it at that time was not a good way.
So Doc began to think and to plan and to sketch out his idea for a submersible barge that would sit on the bottom in protected areas of what was then considered deep water that would withstand the force of the open sea. Doc took his idea to Dean McGee, but McGee wasn't interested. Finally, he found financing in Arkansas and built what turned out to be Mr. Charlie, the world's first mobile offshore drilling rig. So it's built, and you take it out to sea. Do you remember that day?
I sure do. We, of course, left the shipyard, towed it out, went out into Breton Sound, where the water was about 20 feet deep, to give it a test, to sink it, and then pick it back up and see if everything worked like we wanted to.
And all around you, there are a bunch of little boats.
That's right, several of them. With competitors or curious people, oil field scouts, and so forth.
Were you afraid it might just turn over or not work at all? Did that ever cross your mind?
No, I had pretty good confidence. I was worried about some things, but in general, that it would go down and come back up safely, I wasn't too worried about that.
And it did?
It did. I was kind of taken aback in the shipyard when the guy who really was the big heavy with J. Ray McDermott, a fellow named Roger Wilson, came along and told the shipyard guy, he said, put me some pad eyes here and there on it, because when it turns over out in the Gulf, I'm going to be the one who'll have to come salvage it. Well, that kind of tripped me up a little bit. But
did you weld those on?
No, no, we didn't do that.
The world was so impressed with the barge that the September 1954 edition of Life magazine carried a picture spread saying that a singularly monstrous contraption sinks to the bottom of the Gulf and provides a firm anchorage for drilling oil wells. Mr. Charlie started drilling for Shell in Block 27, South Pass. The rest, as they say, is history. That became the East Bay oil field, one of the biggest oil fields in the Gulf. It started a long ride for a lot of people, a ride that changed lives, created businesses, and made the peaceful bayous come alive with a dramatic new industry. The Gulf became a magnet for all kinds of people, including a Tennessee diver named Johnny Johnson.
I'll tell you, it's really staggering, because, I mean, we went from the days of using garden hose and World War II gas masks and chain links for our weight belts, you know, up to where we are now at the highly sophisticated.
Now, wait a minute. You really did that?
It was the closest thing to it. It was such a closeness to there that you thought when you were on a job that whoever came out there who had the largest box of tools and fittings, those were the guys who made the job on the call list, because they were able to improvise and they were able to make things work.
There was a stirring along the bayou. The shrimp boat was slowly being replaced by the supply boat.
We worked 24 hours a day, and I was having better than $100 an hour for my share, my two boats and my share. So when you're catching shrimp, was about $88 a barrel, $83 a barrel, and we would average more than 1 hour for 24 hours. So
Not bad.
no, at that time it's dollars worth more than it does
Are you
today.
telling me that the oil business pays a little better than that now?
Well, you know, when you work for, got a steady job and shrimp is seasoned, some years it's good, some years it's not.
Boise Bollinger remembers how his dad got into the business.
In the early 50s, right as the offshore oil started, he had picked up a little tugboat that he was watching and pumped it for about 2 weeks, and the guy couldn't pay the bill, so he gave it to him. And he pushing an oil barge, and then ended up buying a number of tugboats and ended up with a fleet of tugs and oil barges.
In 1956, the Laborde brothers came up with a better mousetrap, a new kind of supply boat for the industry with a forward pilot house. The idea became Tidewater Marine, but it was not an easy sell in the beginning.
It was a new concept and had a lot. It was fraught with risk. And the then chairman of the board of Whitney shook his head and said, well, you're a young man, and I guess you'll live long enough to work out of this.
Well, they worked it out. Today, the company controls the largest private fleet of ships in the world. Red Adams started as a roustabout 5 or 6 years into the boom and still remembers a kind of camaraderie.
We drilled a well in 100 feet of water and 100 miles offshore. And the young engineer out there was named John Brock. And John Brock right now happens to be the chairman of the board of United Marine Corporation out in Houston. There's a picture of him and I on the deck of this LST. And he has no shirt on, no hat, shorts, cutoffs. Maybe he had hard toes on, and I'm standing there with a straw hat on and a pair of sunglasses, a T-shirt, and a pair of Levi's. And I made mention to someone that with OSHA right now, we'd probably get more time if they'd have caught us right now than the fellow who tried to assassinate Reagan.
It may not have been done by the book in the beginning because the book had not yet been written, and more people were adding chapters, like a young oil man from Midland.
Hugh Lidke and I were in business in Midland, and we saw an opportunity in the offshore drilling contracting business. A lot of leases had been bought by major companies, mostly at that time, and so we worked out a deal with Letourneau, who had a new kind of offshore drilling rig, three-legged rig. None of the major companies or drilling contractors would touch it, so we kind of gambled and built the first and second and third Letourneau rig. They went on to become prototypes for drilling equipment that sat on the bottom and climbed up the legs. And it was a great experience, and that was back in the mid-50s, I think, and our timing was good. We suffered a couple of setbacks. The first rig bent a leg or did something, had to be hauled into Galveston to be reworked, and the third one or fourth one disappeared, the middle third one. Disappeared in a hurricane. I mean, it just vanished. And I went out. I've never felt my eyeballs actually ache. I was flying in a single-engine plane with Hoyt Taylor. We were looking for any sign of it. We'd taken the people off, and it was gone. $6 million investment, which today would probably cost $76. But we had some ups and downs, but I liked it. I loved the business. It was pioneering, and not so much what Hugh and I did, but the Letourneau design, and also our people were pioneers, the people that were working on these rigs. So I thought we were in on the early stages of a marvelous business.
The business has become not only marvelous, but enormous. In 1996 alone, helicopter operators, for example, flew 3.58 million passengers to and from rigs in the Gulf. The boats that do offshore work constitute the largest fleets of ships in the world. One of the people who helped to get us to deep water is Griff Lee, an humble engineer in the 40s who ended up at McDermott.
It was a marvelous time to get into industry. There weren't any gray-headed old men to tell you what to do or what you'd done wrong, you see. So it was strictly, you had to develop your own. It was a relatively small industry, and we almost all knew each other.
There were only, at that time, offshore industry was confined to a relatively small number of the major oil companies and only 2 or 3 contractors. I remember when I started to work in the industry, the deep water was 20 or 50 feet.
Sure.
When I came to work for McDermott, which was 54, we were working on a test of a platform. I actually tested the concept at the David Taylor Model Basin in Washington of a platform that would extend construction all the way out to 300 feet.
Wow.
That was and so it's been a progression, both in the understanding of the environmental conditions and in the design of the structure which can resist this.
In the late 80s, the headlines called the Gulf of Mexico a dead sea, where the oil had played out. Then the computers took over, and some Buck Rogers thing called pre-stacked depth migration, 3D images that see through the layers of salt, saw oil, lots of oil, in deep and shallow water. And from creative minds inside the business came the technology to drill in that deep water. Now, less than 10 years after the faint of heart had given up, experts estimate the full potential of Gulf deep water could be 25 billion barrels of oil. In 1993, Phillips, Anadarko, and Amoco's Mahogany drilled through the salt.
I think if more Americans understood that, out in the Gulf of Mexico is a Silicon Valley, programs that are more technically challenging than putting them out on the moon, and I'm hoping that's one of the things that will come out of this, proper honoring of the 50th anniversary of what really became a very important thing for the United States. But if this is a start, it's that message over and over again, because we have a great story to tell.
If I take you back to 1959, 1960, and said to you, one of these days they're going to be drilling in 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 feet, what would you think?
I'd have thought somebody lost it. I mean, I would have thought that I knew there was a lot of advanced technology in this dynamic positioning of vessels to drill from, but I would have thought that it would have been very, very difficult to keep the rig over the hole and to do what they do today. I would have thought it would have been impossible, frankly.
If you'd
have said, well, do you think 40 years from now, 30 years from now they'll be doing it? I'd say, hey, this craft can do anything. But back then, I mean, if you'd have said next year or 2 years from now they're going to be a rig to do that, I said,
Now exotic names dot the water beyond the 2,000-foot mark, and they roll off the lips of an excited industry. Cooper, Auger, Mars, Mensa, Marlin, Genesis, Troika, and more, with still others on the drawing board. And not all are being done by the good old boys. The women are getting into the act. Judy Wagner of BP Exploration was in charge of a behemoth called Pompano, a jacket that, resting on its side, would have room for the Astrodome and the 20-story BP Plaza.
We took the traditional technology for a fixed structure like that, and we streamlined it and we slimmed it down, and we were able then to extend structures into 1,300 feet, where at first we'd said, no, we can't even put a fixed structure that deep because of the amount of steel required and the overall cost. But we were able to manage the costs and to continue to use that type of technology.
Judy Wagner is an example of something you see more and more in offshore work. A woman.
Over time, the industry has discovered that it has to take advantage of all of the talent that's available. If we're going to make this technology work, we've got to give everyone an opportunity. And the more diverse the workforce, the more creative ideas we're going to end up with when it's over.
One of those creative ideas came from outer space. Satellites are now helping us look for oil.
Satellites are involved in a lot of things that we do in exploring for oil and gas offshore these days, from communications with remote locations, bringing the data back from well logs and from daily reports and activities on the exploration side, to positioning all the activities we do around the globe. They're all through the satellites.
So you can tell me before I ever go out there whether there's oil there or not?
No, we can't tell you if there's oil there. And what we can tell you, there's a structure that has the potential for holding oil or gas. But from the point of view of actually getting oil and gas to the marketplace, you always have to drill a hole.
Ah, yes, drill a hole. Even in the age of Buck Rogers in the oil patch, you still have to do the basics. At the rate we're going now, production from deep water drilling in the Gulf is expected to quadruple by the turn of the century. Today, a bright moon shines down on oil rigs all over the world in deep pools of water, from the placid Gulf to the hostile, frightening waves of the North Sea.
When the oil industry was kicking off in the North Sea, they needed some pretty good mariners that were used to working in the oil field, which was different than blue water sailors who could run a ship in the open ocean. And they generally came to this area and said, bring your equipment over. You know how to work in rough conditions. Close to platforms, and the mariners from Europe, who are great mariners, don't have that experience.
I remember taking the very first rig to the offshore North Sea in 1965. And back in those days, if you stop and think, all of the offshore expertise resided here in the United States. So if anybody wanted to operate offshore anywhere else in the world, they had to come here and get that expertise. So we took ships and boats and personnel and everything and went to these various foreign areas to operate. And the ship we took to the North Sea in '65 was 268 feet long. It was a big drill ship back then.
Yeah.
Today there are workboats in the North Sea that are dwarf that drill ship. But again, no one told us we couldn't do it.
Now it is being done around the globe. It's a huge business, with much reason to be proud of both the promise and the rewards. But there remains a blemish, a stigma that doesn't go away. It seems at times as if the whole world looks not at the technological marvels, the amazing recovery of our most important resources and the jobs and capital created, but at people who delight in polluting the environment. It began with a blowout and a spill in the Santa Barbara Channel in 1969. The event set off a wave of opposition to offshore oil and gas development. And it continues despite great strides in technology, training, and spill preparedness. The result has been a safety and environmental record that is nothing short of superb. Since 1980, the industry spill rate has equaled 0.001% of the volume of oil produced. And even that record is steadily improving.
If you consider all the safeguards that go into drilling a well, and of course there's no such thing as a typical well, but if we take a 10,000-foot well, maybe 50 miles offshore, which will produce somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 60 to 70,000 barrels of muds, cuttings, and so on. But let's say a company is going to spend $5 million. A percentage would be perhaps 1 to 3% could be spent to protect the environment, which is not an inconsiderable sum.
It's difficult, especially where Congress is concerned. I think it's so tempting for Congress to want to demagogue the issue, and some of my colleagues, former colleagues, are very good at that, so that when there's a bump in prices, that's just the normal reaction of the marketplace, and supply and demand or cold weather, whatever it might be that for the moment has led to an increase in prices, they want to run out and claim there's some kind of a conspiracy. This is those big nasty guys in the oil business trying to get together and organize to conspire to create higher prices. It's part of an educational process. We just have to keep continually reminding both the policymakers as well as the public that this is an intensely competitive business, about as competitive as anything I've ever been involved in. And you really don't have, nobody has the ability to manipulate those markets.
The offshore business, despite its critics, continues to flourish, and the leadership looks forward to even greater promises.
In our company, the offshore represents, I believe, our future growth opportunity. We have very strong operations in California and onshore, but those are very mature parts of the oil and gas business from our perspective. And while we'll continue to actively pursue investments, our real growth opportunity lies in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's in two domains there. It's certainly in what we call the shallower water part of the Gulf, less than 1,500 feet. We rejuvenated that program since the early 90s, and it's been a very important part of our growth to date. But the real future, I believe, lies in the deep water part of the Gulf of Mexico.
The business is very good. at coming up with the innovative ideas to let us economically go ahead and address these frontier areas. And so we're just beginning. The only limitation is how creative we are as companies.
Yes, it's a high-risk business, but it's a high-reward business. The fact that we can handle many risks in this business and still find innovative solutions is, I think, what separates our industry from other enterprises. The energy industry today is dynamic. It's intensely competitive. It is a global business. But I can tell you that we at Kerr-McGee believe that we will have an exciting and successful future. The best is yet to come in the offshore oil and gas business.
When you look at what has been accomplished over the last half-century in the Gulf of Mexico, what you see is a great epic of technology and entrepreneurship, of creativity and willpower and drive. And those have been the forces that have driven the industry, and I think those will be the forces that will continue to drive the industry. And I think one of the challenges of the industry going forward as part of the United States is to convey to the public that it is in fact a technology industry, an industry of the future, not an industry of the past, and that only reflects what is, after all, the truth.
Are we to the point where we have gone about as far as we can go?
I thought that when we were in 300 feet of water, so I'm not about to say no. I'm not about to say no, we can't go any further.
So as we approach the 50th anniversary of somebody venturing out to 18 feet and actually finding oil, the sky's the limit?
The sky is the limit. The technology is just incredibly suited for the deep water. We're now beginning to use some things that enable us to produce oil and gas in those depths of water. And I promise you that if we find oil and gas out in 10,000 feet or greater, that this industry will figure out a way to produce it.